I'm Charley Barnes, afternoon radio personality with K99 here in Northern Colorado. Like many of you, I believe we live in the greatest country of all and have never taken my freedom for granted. In this continuing weekly video series for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, I'll be sitting down with our local veterans from World War II to present conflicts to document their life stories for future generations to see and hear. I believe it's important for their stories to be told and never forgotten. We live in the land of the free and home of the brave because of them. These are their stories. For the record, today's interview is at the home of Mr. Leo Weaver and his wife Mary Lou here at Meadowview Assisted Living in Greeley, Colorado. My name is Charley Barnes. Our videographer is Drew Bankston. Mr. Weaver is a veteran of World War II, a Tech 5 with the United States Army. And Mr. Weaver, thank you for allowing us into your home today to talk about your life.
Thank you.
You're sharp as a tack. Let's go back to the very beginning, find out a little bit about who you are. Let's start with your parents, your mom and dad. Where were they born? When were they born? What did they do when you were as a child?
Well, it's an interesting background in the sense that my father actually was born in a very, very small community in Nebraska, and lived there for a short time. This was way back in the late 1800s, actually, and Des Moines, Nebraska, and then shortly after that moved to an area in central Kansas where they eventually farmed, with a typical brothers and sisters, 10 or 12, all that sort of thing. They had, but they were well off. They had stock and a regular farmhouse, if you would. But nonetheless, things happened. Dad died at an early age, and there was a remarriage and things. And my dad left his home in Kansas and was working at a department store in Chicago when he was 14 years old. And in his course, he went on and he spent 6 years in the Army. He was a World War I veteran. He was an infantry sergeant in World War I, and spent 3 years in the Philippines, actually, too. But when he was mustered out in Hoboken, New Jersey. And when he mustered out, he stayed there a little bit, long enough to meet my mother, who was living in Patterson, New Jersey at the time, and was smitten enough so he stayed there. So that made me, and she actually was born in New York City, but that made me a native of New Jersey when I was born, along with my 4 brothers and sisters over the years. Mary Lou, on the other hand, was shows the impact of wars, really. She was born in Oswego, Kansas, and when she was about 11 years old, there was a disruption in her family, and by that time her brothers were both old enough so that they were subject to service, and we were in the war. It was 1941, actually. They were old enough to be subject to the draft very quickly, so that they were both in service, and she had an older sister. But her uncle worked in Washington, D.C., and there was a great need for work, and her mother, who was the registrar of deeds there in that little county in Kansas, lost an election, and she had a chance to get a government job in Washington, D.C. And so she moved. Mary Lou at the time was 11, 12 years old. And so that's how she got to Washington, D.C. I got to Washington, D.C. because I was going to school in the early part of the war. I was 16 little young.
You're jumping way ahead. Let's.
You want me? You want to go back there?
Yeah, we'll get there.
Well, there was a lot happening.
So you were born. You were born. We're gonna work all the way up to that. So we talked about your mom and dad. When were you born?
I was born in. Actually, I was born in a hospital in Patterson, New Jersey, but went home and was raised in Clifton, New Jersey, which I always regarded as my hometown, Clifton.
And born again when? 24, 25?
1925.
1925.
Yeah.
How many siblings? You mentioned four?
Four.
Four
Yeah.
siblings. And who were they? What names?
Well, my brother Dave, my sisters, I had three. The oldest, Ellen, actually was about 4 years older than I was. And I'm glad you brought it up, because when she, an unusual girl, went to school, a teacher's college in New Jersey, and graduated, and was in one of the first classes of the first group of the recently established Women's Army Corps in World War II. So she went to officers candidate school and was a whack officer, if you would. And incidentally, they didn't send women Army Corps overseas till after the war. But I'm jumping ahead here, but I'll tell you that she went to Germany after the war and looked me up, because I was still there after the war. So, and then there were the two others, much younger, and one was called Naomi and the other Janice. There's only one living today of my siblings, and that's Janice, who's my younger sister.
You still keep in contact?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And where's she at?
She's, believe it or not, living where the family was 50 years ago, 100. I guess it was, 1920 when they built that house in Clifton, New Jersey. What does that make it?
And she's actually in
6 years.
She's actually in that home?
In that home,
I'll be
yeah,
there.
yeah.
I'll be
Her
there.
family is growing up, and but that's an interesting thing. It's the only house she ever lived in.
Extreme. That's an
incredible.
Interview all in itself right there. So you grew up in New Jersey, graduated high school when?
1941.
And how long? So you were drafted, correct, or did you enlist?
Well, I was only 16 when I graduated. That was in 1941.
And I believe in our pre-interview the other day, you said you had actually started some college classes at 16.
Yeah, I went to the College of Engineering, New York University. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Drafted when?
April, actually reported in April of 1943.
How did it happen back in those days? Did you get a knock on the door? Did it come in the mail? How did you find out that Uncle Sam won?
We got a letter, very standard letter, which started, "Greetings." You have been.
You remember that, don't you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Greetings.
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor had been attacked, 2 years earlier than that.
Yeah.
And even going back a little bit, as far as coming out of the Great Depression, I'm sure you have some fond memories of what that was like. Pearl Harbor's bombed in 1941.
Yeah, I remember it, just like you remember such things as 9/11 today.
Right. It was a lot tougher life back then, obviously, than what we had to do. Or do you look back and
oh yeah,
it is just something you had to do, and you got through it?
I remember the Depression very well. We were very fortunate. My father was a railroad worker. He worked for the Erie Railroad. And that had a lot of influence on me, because he was a self-made guy. I told you that, he never was able to finish school. But he was actually a licensed civil engineer, had a significant job in those days in the powerhouse that ran provided all the power and heat for throwing switches and heating and cars and all that in the main terminal of the Erie Railroad, Jersey City, New Jersey, which is right across the river from New York City. And the trains didn't go into New York City at that time from the Erie Railroad and others. They came into Jersey City, and then you went across on a ferry. But in any case, that was a real influence on me. No question about it. That's how I got into engineering.
Do you remember, the family's feelings, his feelings, your feelings, in 1941 when Pearl Harbor was bombed? Did you want to go into the service then? Just had other things going on? Why did you not enlist then?
Well, because I couldn't. But it never occurred to me, frankly. I was 16 years old. But did it have an impact? Oh, yeah.
Sure.
But kind of an impact that is so great that the implications of it just didn't sink in any way, shape, or form.
Is it something that you...
Well, somebody
you remember like yesterday, hearing the news about what happened?
Oh yeah, I can tell you exactly where I was. I was at my grandmother's house in Patterson, and I was listening to the radio a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I heard the announcement that the report that the Japs had had bombed Pearl Harbor, and Pearl Harbor. Where's that?
Right.
And the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor?
Yeah. On our soil? I mean, how does that happen?
The implications of that, it was disbelief, and it just took a while to sink in.
I suppose like 9/11.
Yeah.
Did for us here in modern times. So 1943, you get the greetings notice from Uncle Sam. How long after you had been drafted were you at a hometown and reporting for duty? Was it?
Well, I actually I don't recall the exact date of when I turned 18 and was eligible for the draft in January, and I had to receive that letter sometime in January, February, because I reported on the the end of April, I think it was 23rd or 30th of April.
I think it was the 23rd, yeah. And where'd you report?
Well, in those days, why you reported to the city hall, and they drew a bus up, and about 30 or 40 or 50 other guys reported, and the newspapers were there and took a picture of you. And
set you off.
And you climbed on board. You just had a little overnight bag, and you climbed on board that bus. And in our case, it took us to Fort Dix, New Jersey, which is maybe 60 miles away.
So when you got on the bus, you actually didn't really know where you were going. You just knew you were.
Well, we didn't know where we were going until we reported. But that's just the beginning. Most of the time, you never knew where you were going.
Right. That was the beginning of many surprises, right?
Yeah.
So you're at Fort Dix. What's it like? You're in the United States Army. Were you ready to go? Anxiety? Any fear? Did you want to go overseas and get in the war?
Oh,
Where were you at?
So much was happening. At that time, you're looking around, you're saying, did you want to go overseas? You began to learn things real fast. I'll give you one example. One of the sergeants came in on the first day or two. We were just at Fort Dix a very short time, relatively, just being processed, really, as to where you would go from here. And he asked, who's interested in joining the paratroopers? And you were saying, did you know what you want? Bunch of guys. Yeah, I want to join the paratroopers. Well, you know what they ended up doing? They ended up over in the armory cleaning the dust off of the girders up there, okay? So we learned real fast that, hey, you gotta take these things with a grain of salt.
Be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. It was really funny, but that, that's the way it was.
What did you want to do? I mean, if you had your choice, was there something that you had a particular keen interest in?
Well,
I mean, I know you mentioned your father had the engineering background. Did you want to get into combat? Were you a tank guy? Were you?
well, no, I was interested in engineering. I learned from my father, and I was 18 years old, and I already had almost 2 years of college. And incidentally, that's another thing you learned real quick. In those days, very few kids my age, and from where I came from, ever had a chance to go to college, okay? Very unusual. And so you're with a bunch of guys, and if they found out you were a college boy, they give you a hard time, okay? I'm not talking about being nasty or something like that. If somebody had a question, I don't know the answer to that. Ask Weaver, he went to college, or something like that, you know. So most of my compadres that I worked with never knew I spent a day inside a college. I didn't need any of that kind of crud.
You were tough enough as it was, right?
Yeah, it was tough enough as it was.
So you're at
So yes, I was asked if I would be interested in going to officers candidate school. But I knew about going to officers candidate school because I remembered the stories my father told me. I told you he was a hard-bitten infantry sergeant, okay? And he told me about the 90-day wonders who came out of 90 days training in officers candidate school, and he shook his head, you know, as you can understand. And I was a slight kid, and I said, I don't think that's for me right now. And so I turned down the opportunity to go to officers candidate school, and instead I was sent to Combat Engineer basic training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where I was going to learn how to be a soldier. And they're pretty good teachers.
Well, I think you learned a lot. You know, I know that, and again, we'll get into this, you know, your post-military experience. You know, I think you learned a lot in the military that you never really thought you were going to be learning as far as post-military experience.
Absolutely.
You know, it's amazing how some of those things transpire.
Incredible influence on my life. There's no question about that.
Let's go overseas. How long was it, do you remember? You probably less than a year, and you're on a transport ship.
No, I was overseas almost a year and a half. But I went over, I was not, well, in fact, in the preparation and the follow-through, I made a part of a cadre that, and was assigned to an engineer combat battalion, and we had to put in, you know, develop that, train it, and whatever. Mm-hmm. And we didn't, I didn't know it at the time, but we were part of, as I read in history later, we were part of getting ready for the big thrust as to what was supposed to be the big thrust to go across the Rhine River, which was going to take a massive amount of engineering because it would be a kind of a last stand for the German army and getting across that formidable natural thing of the Rhine River was an object to be, you know, in the overall planning is what I understood later. I didn't know what was going on when I was, as we called it, a grunt in the Army. But
And for the record, I don't think you mentioned it, but what was the battalion you were with that just started?
the 1251st Engineer Combat Battalion.
1251st.
Yeah. We were assigned to a number of armies eventually in various places, but we were not assigned to any specific infantry division.
Now, I would assume once you got across the pond, it was there was no acclimation period. You were thrown right into the work.
No, it didn't happen that way. We went over in October, which was several months after D-Day, okay? And the war was going very well.
And for this time, it was October 44.
Yeah. The war was going very well, and if you say, I guess, according to plan, and we were in England, poised, waiting to go in to be moved over to the continent for the big push that would go across the Rhine River. But Hitler changed all that with his really big thrust and what happened in December, early December, and that was just a month and so plus after we got there. When I think the date was 17th or 18th of December, something like that, when he pushed off in the Ardennes and what became known as the most significant battle other than D-Day of World War II in Europe, and that was the Battle of the Bulge. Well, that changed everything. And while we were with a gracious English family, several of my friends and myself, on Christmas Day, by a day after Christmas, we were loading on trains, heading for the channel to get on ships to take us across the channel to be sent up to the front, created by the breakthrough. So that was how that developed. And
Was there anxiety at that point, knowing you were getting closer to the front, or possibly closer to the front? I mean,
well, there's always anxiety. There's great times, but there's always for example, when we went across the pond, we went across the pond in the one of the largest convoys there ever was. We had air cover, and all the protection. As a troop ship, we were in the middle, and so on. But you're on this troop ship, and you're down in a hold where there's 600 of you, and stacked bunks and stuff. And you look up, and there's a hatch up there. It's smaller than the size of an ordinary doorway. And you look up there and you say to yourself, if a tin fish ever hit them, that was our slang term for a torpedo. Okay?
Sure.
A tin fish ever hit us, do you think 600 of us could get up there through that door under? Now that creates a little anxiety.
So was that the most fear you experienced in World War II?
No, but that was just part of the deal that contributes. If you get enough of that kind of stuff and it gets closer, that's where all this, what they call today, post-traumatic stress comes from. As opposed to the old. In our war, we called it combat fatigue in World War I. They call it shell shock, that kind of thing. Yeah, but and as you get closer, things get a little bit more, quote, interesting. For example, on the day after Christmas, it was a train ride down to the coast, get on a transport. It was what we called a limey transport. That was a British troop transport, and we're scheduled to go out on the very day that we were there. And of course, you go out of the south. We're just talking about a channel. The English Channel is only, I don't know what it was, 20, 30 miles wide there or something. I'm not sure what the geography was, but it wasn't very wide. But the troop ship that pulled out earlier, before us, got outside the harbor and took a hit. And later on, I didn't get any of the details at the time. That's an interesting story, war story, in the sense that I knew what, I don't know how word travels, but boy, you travels faster than lightning. And we knew on that ship, because what seemed to be either a torpedo or a mine, it hit underneath and blew the bottom out of that troop ship. I think elements, as I recall, 66th Infantry Division was on it, going across just like we were because of the bulge, you know. That ship went down in 10 minutes. And if their ship was the same size as ours, it probably had 2,000, 2,500 men on it. They lost 800 of them. Bang, like that, you know. Interesting sidelight of that story. 15 years later, when I was working in Chicago in an organization, it won't take the time to go into the details of it, but a guy I met at a evening reception, we got to talking, and I found, you know what I found out?
He was on that
He was on the ship that was torpedoed. Yeah, imagine that.
What are the odds of that?
What are the odds of that?
Yeah, that's incredible.
And incidentally, that same guy, we're sitting here he was an assistant manager, I'll say, of the City Managers Association. This was in the late 50s or something like that. I can mention names. Bob Run. You know where I met him the second time after that? He was the city manager of Fort Collins, Colorado.
What are the odds of that? Unbelievable.
A lot of people would know Bob, of course. He eventually went on to other things, but yeah, that kind of a thing. And we went across, climbed down the side of the ship because the arm was still in a mess. You know, you go down the rope ladders, had our packs, walked 15 miles, bedded down, and this is at the end of December, in the coldest winter in Europe.
So was this your scariest moment of World War II?
No.
You know, I know you would talk,
We weren't comfortable, I can tell you
Right.
that, because we had to sleep on the ground.
Anxiety comes in again, right?
Yeah, but there was...
You and I had talked in our pre-interview that, you said that, I'd never spent a night in the foxhole. You weren't necessarily right on the front lines, and I kind of responded with, the engineers, though, were still primary targets, because if you're not building those bridges...
Oh, yeah, sure.
Give us your fondest memory of, what you thought might have been your last day there. Do you remember any air attacks? Were you ever strafed?
Yeah.
Give us, what is your one most fondest memory of
they weren't fond.
Well, I use that word facetiously. I guess fond is your most vivid, lasting memory of World War II that way.
There were a number of them.
Too many to go into detail.
Well,
So you had your fair share.
It was, we weren't in the foxhole on the front line, but even like an incident, and actually, quote, I was a water supply technician, okay? I was in charge of a watering point, okay? Which doesn't sound like anything to do with combat. But, and this particular thing wasn't next to a river crossing the Rhine or anything, but it was next to a canal in Holland, and they had put down, and, oh, it's hard to simplify this because it was after the Battle of the Bulge. We were reassigned quickly from the First Army to the British Second Army. Yeah, I was in the British Second Army too. I can tell you some real jokes about that. Did you realize that when the British fight a war, it stops at 10 o'clock in the morning while they have tea?
Probably some truth to that.
Yeah. And for 18 years after I came back, I wouldn't even look at a Brussels sprout because that was one of the mainstays of their
With or without cheese.
Yeah, but in any case, I also got the finest compliment I got in my Army career from a high-ranking British Army officer during that time. And that's a joke too, but it isn't. I mean, it happened for real. We were, you know, with the kind of equipment we had, we moved on a minute's notice. We could set up next to a canal, and in 15 minutes we could be pumping drinking water. Because whether you're in a foxhole up front or whatever, they got to get drinking water.
Water's primary.
Yeah.
Water is primary.
So that's what a combat engineer, that's one of the many things that a combat engineer battalion did, besides laying minefields, cleaning up minefields, building bridges across ravines to get tanks across and all that kind of stuff. But in this case, they had put in a forward British fighter base, and you know you can do that just simply by putting steel mats down, and they were coming in, and they had a whole bunch of fuel dump area reasonably close, and the Germans had a few airplanes left. Okay, and all of this to tell you where you they had what we called bed check Charlies or something. The way they did that, they didn't have much left, and there were not massive attacks, but this guy would come in low out of nowhere and come down, and because of that, we had a 50 caliber machine gun in our bunker where we were. At the same time, we were purifying water.
Right. You probably still hear that sound of him coming in, huh?
Well, he was there and gone almost before you even knew it. But yeah, and so that was, you know, you never knew what he was going to drop or how close he would be coming. So yeah, that was one moment. But I do, if you want to take the time, I'll tell you about this compliment. It wasn't a formal medal, but it was even better. If you know anything about the English, and I told you we were assigned to the British Second Army at the time. The second day we were there, and we'd been supplying them. They came over, the units, to get water, and this British staff car pulled up, and it wasn't a regular Army staff car. I don't remember what kind of a Mercedes-Benz they commandeered or whatever, and this snappy British Tommy got out and saluted after he took opened the back door, and this guy got out the back. And I knew a little bit as a G.I. Joe about the British Army, but I didn't. He had more pips on his shoulder, and I said, you know, what's going on here? And he got out of there snappy with he had one of these
crops?
Crops,
riding
oh
crops?
yeah, one of these crops, you know, and they were dressed like they just were coming from a review
Dressed to the nines.
Buckingham Palace, you know. And he come over towards where we were, and I'll tell you, me and the other guys that I was in charge of the thing. We were a pretty crummy looking bunch. We hadn't had a shower in weeks and clothes dirty, you know, the whole 9 yards. And he came over and he said, "Who's in charge here?" I said, "Oh my God, I wonder what I did now." You know? And so, Corporal Weaver, sir, I gave him a salute. And he said, "I had to come over here and say thank you. I had the best cup of tea that I've had since I've left England this morning."
The shining moment of World War II.
Yeah, my shining moment, the highest award I got. And boy, it couldn't be a better compliment, you know. I don't know what the next to the Congressional Medal of Honor was from England, but to have a high-ranking officer make a special trip over to say thank you.
Well, and you know how important their tea is, you know, so.
The biggest joke is that we did turn out good water, but the GIs had to drink the sanitary stuff, okay? And it has a high count of chlorine in it, because that's what it takes, you know, in a short period of time to kill the kind of bugs that you don't want them to get sick from. Mm-hmm. And so for the average GI, he wouldn't understand that at all, because that water to him, it may have tasted sanitary, but it didn't taste very good. It just had too much chlorine in it, you know. But when you make tea, what do? You boil the water. That gets rid of the chlorine. So what turned out to be, you know, the tea was in top-notch stuff, you know, and that's why he felt it was so good. Yeah, that was
the shining moment of World War II. So when did you come home? Late 45?
Yeah, I had, we were, you know, in that 4 months that, a period of time we arrived in France and went up, and we were in combat zone until the end. And
that's with the British Second Army.
Well, the First Army and then the British Second Army. The First Army was the one that took the brunt of the bulge. And then there was some high-level politicking going on, and I'm not quite sure. You have to read the book on Patton to get all the information on that stuff going on between Eisenhower and Montgomery and all the things that happened at the time of that bulge. Well, no use even spending a lot of time talking about that, but that was so far removed from a guy like me who was down there in the mud, you know, that was all foreign. I didn't know any of that kind of stuff. 50 years later I read about it in the book. But when the war was over, I had enough points. It was a point system. Right. And depending on the amount of points you had and the amount of time you had overseas,
you could rotate back home.
Well, you were first in line. If you got to go home first. If you, the less time you'd been in the combat zone and the less time, or if you hadn't been, or, you know, you were the ones that, because going home meant a 30-day furlough and off to finish the Asian War, okay? There was still a war going on the other side of the world.
Yeah,
and so because I had more points and more time in combat zone, I had a much higher priority in the sense that I wasn't amongst the nearly amongst the first that were shipped back to the States. As a matter of fact, they reorganized us, and we built a place called Camp Top Hat in Antwerp, Belgium, at the end of the war, which was a very large port of embarkation. That was where tens of thousands of troops were brought in and sent back to the States. Now, all those guys lucked out, because by the time they got back to the States, and so on, you know, the war in Asia was over the first week, essentially the first week in August. And so the war in Europe was over the first week in May. So there's just a few months in between, but all those first guys turned out that they were the ones that got out of the army, or, you know, got back to civilian life quicker. So it turned, because they didn't have to go to the Pacific. Most of them. I think some of them went anyway, but most of them did not have to, as far as I knew. But then,
and you're referring to the bombs in Japan.
Yeah,
and Hiroshima,
that's yeah.
Because before that happened, I mean, you know, your chances of going to the Pacific Theater were highly likely.
Well,
without the
we're very likely.
That was something in the back of your mind.
Very likely. Oh yeah, there was still a war to win, and it was a question of how soon you'd get put in an outfit and sent to the Pacific. But the reverse happened, and I was put in the Army of Occupation. That had really nothing to do with being in the Combat Engineers or anything like that. I would in occupying, but my education continued. Of course, during the end of that time, and at the end of the war, I also had opportunities to see things that nobody likes to talk about. But and after the war, I had the opportunity in being in southern Germany, just a beautiful southern. I don't know if you've ever been in southern Germany, but south of Munich or München. And I was in a small town down there as part of the Army of Occupation, close to the Austrian border, close to the Alps, you know. Beautiful place. But I got to know the German people. And so my education continued in terms of people who seemed a lot like us, and yet some pretty terrible things happened. And that made a real impression on me. So I came back here, like, I don't know, I mentioned it, that I felt like, you know, in my wartime experiences, I was saying, people, can you sum it up or whatever? I said, yeah, my war, I'd say I got $1 million education. And also joke a little bit about that, where I got my first PhD. I got $1 million education, and then one guy asked me one time, would you do it again if I offered you $1 million? And I told him, hell no, I wouldn't. And then I looked him right in the eye, but from what I saw and know, I'd do it for nothing. And that was the value of my education. And as you can tell, it's made a tremendous mark on me.
It's something you don't put you can't put a price on something like that.
No, absolutely not. The way it worked out.
You learned, and that's what, you know, when we started the interview, you learned a lot more than you thought you were going to learn when you went over there, and you know that you carried over, obviously, you know, well into your post-military life.
Yeah, it influenced what I did. It's why I went back and finished up school, got into public health engineering, and
Well, let's come back over the pond then. When honorable discharge 46.
yeah. And I went back to school, finished up.
Where'd you go to school?
New York University. I went back to the same school.
And then after that, when did you meet Mary Lou?
Well, I met her because at school I found out that the United States Public Health Service had an engineer corps, and they were involved in public health, and they were at the time a part of the armed forces, and they had an engineer component as well as medical doctor, nurse, scientist, and so on. And so I put in an application to get a commission in the U.S. Public Health Service. Didn't come through. Things in government don't seem to happen very fast, very often.
Even then?
Even then, yeah. And so I went to work in Tennessee as a hydraulic engineer, civil engineer, which was my basic background training, as well as what's called now environmental engineering. And I was there about 3 months, and my commission came through. And so I was brought to Washington, D.C. for my first assignment. And that's where I met my wife, Mary Lou.
This 47, 48?
48.
48. So
yeah.
you were married, what was, July 48? Is that
Yeah.
correct? July 48?
Yeah.
Love at first
No,
sight?
we were married July 49.
July 49. Love
Yeah.
at first sight? For her?
Was that?
Love at first sight?
Well, it had to be, really. And she was 18 years old at the time. That's another joke. She told when we met in a little chapel. I just converted to Christianity, actually. Became a born-again Christian. It's one of the things I learned that happened to me although it was a long time coming, when I was in Tennessee. But we met in a little chapel there on 14th Street in Washington, D.C. And her mother, who was, I guess, part of the greeting, it was a small group, small chapel kind of thing, 40, 50 people, something like that, I forget. She invited me home for lunch. And so that's what began it, And I was there from October through April of 1949, but that's the time of our courtship. And
Married how long then now?
well, we're in our 66th year.
Well, isn't that fantastic? That's just fantastic.
But then I got transferred out after my first assignment, which incidentally jumping way ahead. Recently we had this epidemic threat in Africa, not a threat, and it was an epidemic. Is it Ebola? Is it?
Yes, yeah.
And all of that fuss. You remember that one or two of the people were sent to the clinical center of the National Institutes of Health, which is really a part of the Public Health Service. Well, the connection? In 1948, in the 6 months I was in Washington before I was transferred to another assignment, I worked with the senior engineer who designed the waste handling system for that clinical center. That's how long it's been there. It was created at that time as part of the tools being developed to combat communicable diseases in the United States, which were a real problem that were tackled at that time. That was before there was any environment really controlled at all, much of any kind. We were dumping sewage in the streams and dumping our wastes in the air by the tons. And, we had an air pollution incident in Denora, Pennsylvania, where 20 people died in a week. It was a real public health problem. And that's what I had become a part of as a U.S. Public Health Service officer. And that's been another very, in terms of the motivation and so on, I was really proud to have been a part of that team, which virtually eliminated communicable diseases in the 1950s as we knew them then. That's a long time ago. It's a whole different world now. We couldn't even measure chemicals in the water effectively at that time. We had to develop all that equipment. But anyway, it's another war.
Yeah, to get back on track, you got married in 1948, you're back in D.C. here. When did the family start as far as when you started the United States Public Health Service? Did your family come right away?
Oh yeah, I was assigned, we were exploring ways to get rid of community solid waste at that time. The specific project I was on, it was at Mandan, North Dakota. And I went back to Washington, D.C. and got married. Mary Lou and our honeymoon was 3 days in Lexington, Virginia, and then the drive back to North Dakota. And I was there for almost 2 years. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, in those days, you got rid of, I know it's hard to believe, but you got rid of your garbage. You simply, for the most part, you carried it out to the edge of town and just dumped it, And big areas were covered with just garbage and trash and that. There wasn't any plastic much in those days, Bakelite, but garbage and trash. And what you were creating was mosquito breeding, rat infested, just breeding areas for the things that led to disease. And so we had to learn how to handle it. What can you do with it? And we developed something that was called it wasn't just us alone. What I was looking at specifically was how you could do it in a cold climate. And it was cold in North Dakota in 49. I remember the January where it didn't get above 0 degrees. And the coldest temperature was 50 below zero. But we learned how to do that. And today, that method, as well as such things as recycling and so forth, which had a tremendous impact on the control of communicable diseases, as well as the wastewater side. And incidentally, the medical side of that was such things as infantile paralysis. My father had malaria. Mary Lou's mother had scarlet fever and diphtheria. You don't hear of any of that anymore. They're pretty accepting. Folks are not accepting, measles and that sort of stuff now, but there's problems with that. But that's another story. But the important thing is those kinds of communicable diseases. Today we're still fighting hard cancer and other long-term diseases that are much more subtle and difficult. We understand viral diseases and so on more. But again, you're always looking for funny things. During the during the Korean War, why we had to send a group from the U.S. Public Health Service to Korea, because we worked closely with the Army, to actually provide the medical services to the Coast Guard, and and so on. But that's not widely known. It's because it's a relatively small operation. You don't hear much about it. But what was the Public Health Service doing in Korea? It wasn't in the Combat Engineers. So I answered that question. I asked him, well, what would you do if you were responsible for 100,000 prisoners of war, all of whom had diarrhea? And they look at me, like, are you joking? No, I'm not joking. That was an actual thing, that had to be handled. I'm talking about during the Korean War. So, yeah. Well, you can't handle it if you do certain things, obviously. Not the least of is wash your hands.
Right. Yeah. Starting with washing the hands, right?
So, anyway, so much for that. Is there anything else that?
Yeah, back to the original question. As far as your family, let's start again there with your children when you started having kids, because we want to get them involved here as well. Who are your children? Go ahead and start down the pecking order and tell us, briefly who they are and where they are.
All of our children are grandparents now.
So you've got great-grandchildren already here?
They're not all grandparents, but they're all parents.
Starting with who? Who was your firstborn?
Was a girl, Leanne, yeah.
And where's Leanne?
Leanne lives here in Greeley.
Okay.
And
And you have great-grandkids then through Leanne?
yeah. And she had a daughter and a son. He works in the department, actually a graduate of Northern Colorado University. And he's now in the athletic department of the University of Cincinnati. Previously at the University of Connecticut. I don't know, something to do with enforcement, that kind of thing.
Second born?
Pardon?
Your second child?
The second was our oldest son, Steve, who went on to, a lot like his father. Actually, he went to Virginia, Steve went to Virginia Military Institute, studied to be an engineer, spent 4 years in the service, actually, during Vietnam. Although he wasn't in Vietnam, he spent 4 years in Germany during the Cold War. And then went on in engineering, also in the public health service, is retired, has been in Alaska for many years now. He's running their public engineering in construction. They do a lot of work of that type up there.
Married?
Yeah, he has 2 sons. One grandson who's in the Navy. He's been in the Navy about 12 years, actually. He's a load master. Actually, he's active reserve now, as I recall. Yeah, he's been on the aircraft carriers, and it was in fire control for years. And his daughter, who's a school teacher in the state of Washington. Where is it? Bremerhaven? Is that close? I don't know. Smaller town, I think, up there now. One of them has a daughter. She is not married presently. Then the third one is Charley, who lives here now. He's retired. He's had 3 children. They're all grown. A couple of them, and then one of them's a graduate of the University of California. The other 2 are out of Florida schools where he went. He was a contractor. I think he went. He was in California, and then they had a big bust there back in the 90s. No, he moved back. He went to Florida and was there about 18 years, and was in the contracting business. But now he came up here and has been in our home, and the fact that he came up and helped me, because my job is full-time caretaker for my wife, who is in the stage of Alzheimer's, and but he came up and made it possible for us to be at home another year and a half. And he's now driving a truck, although it's not a part-time thing, but he's out of the contracting business, health-oriented back problems and so on. Let's see, I guess there's 3 more. It's, Mike, who's an environmental engineer, also out of Purdue, actually, where he graduated from. But he's works for the Indian Health Service Division of the Public Health Service, I guess it is. But he's responsible for the hospital construction and activities in the western United States for them. That goes on at all of the Indian reservations, you know. They have that. The Public Health Service is responsible for the health programs in the Indian Health Service all over the United States.
He's
but
up in the
then
Seattle,
there's
he's in the Seattle area.
Dan, who's he's in the medical field. He's in Alaska. He has a doctorate of physical therapy. He's also a registered nurse, and he's at a rural clinic in Alaska on the Prince of Wales Island. That's on the southern peninsula of Alaska.
My daughter's going to be going for that same exact thing, a doctorate of physical therapy, also from UNC. So, little connection there.
Huh. Yeah. Well, he's doing very well at it.
I think ironically, my daughter's going to end up in Alaska doing the same thing. That's what she wants to do anyway. So
Is that what she wants to do?
Yeah, pretty much the exact same thing as Daniel's doing. Yeah, in the same place. Same geographical location. So
Well, there's plenty of opportunities up there.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's a big place.
She should search out one of the opportunities for the U.S. Public Health Service.
Yeah, I'm going to I'll be bringing that up to her. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So after Daniel, last in the pecking order
is Allison, our youngest daughter. She actually went to Kansas State and got in the PR business more than anything else. Well, she was responsible for community relations at the school district in Dodge City, Kansas for a while. But when Liza was born, and Liza was a whoops baby, because they had thought 2 was going to be enough, and but Liza came along, and Liza was not epileptic until she was 6 months old, and then she had her first seizure. She was a perfectly normal baby until then. But that influenced her life. While Allison worked in PR generally, as I say, was responsible for community relations in the school district and doing that kind of thing. But with Liza and the care that was required by, she did things like, she's a licensed practical nurse. She went back and got an LPN, which is, you can do with, it's kind of a associate degree kind of thing. And she also went beyond that and got a master's degree as a family counselor. And of course, as you would imagine, with all the experience she had, she's had jobs along the way, with working for the Epilepsy Foundation and that sort of thing. So it just changed her whole life, this direction she has been going in.
Sounds to me like, your children have all, you've directly impacted most of them as far as their careers, from, what you did, after your military service with the United States, public health service. They've all kind of dabbled in that kind of field in one way or another.
One way or another. Yeah, I had not even thought of that, but you're right. Yeah, different directions, different directions entirely, some of them, but
sometimes we just influence others and we don't even know we're doing it.
Yeah.
When did you retire, Leo? Officially retire? Because I know you had, and this would be what, your third honorable discharge then from?
Well, from the public health service, yeah.
Because most people.
But that was a long time ago.
Most people leave their military career with one honorable discharge. You've got several.
Yeah.
So when did you officially retire?
In 1968, but that's, what are we talking about? 40 some years ago, I guess, isn't it?
A little more.
68, yeah, we're talking. But then I went on and was in Washington, D.C. for a while, and running the Washington offices of organizations, Public Works Organization, and a Water Pollution Control Federation. And then I got a job in, actually it was a really neat opportunity. In the Ohio River Basin, there was an organization created right after World War II called the Ohio River Valley Water Sanitation Commission, which was made up as a result of an interstate compact of 8 states, which, and of course it has to be approved by the Congress. And so the 8s, they were responsible for the control of pollution on the Ohio River, which is a river 1,000 miles long, And that was, we did some great things there. But that was, I started that, I was there 13 years. I started in 74. And then I felt like I had done what I could there. And I just opened my own, I had my own consulting business, just myself. And I worked in that for about 8 years. And then time caught up with me. I think the best way I could say that with all my expertise, and I was just small, so I couldn't graduate to be chairman of the board or president.
You already were.
Yeah. And so I got to the point where I said to myself, well, you're pretty good with Kodak carousels, but PowerPoint is here. And you're 75, and I think maybe it's time for you to start enjoying other things.
You weren't ready to start over and learn something new at 75. You've done it pretty much all.
Even if I was ready, I'm not sure I was capable. But yeah, and that's when I really officially retired. But I didn't get out of everything. When I came out here, there were opportunities. I served on the Board of Health here for 2 terms. I was chairman of the Board of Health for Will County. And also on the Stormwater Board for the city of Cincinnati, when I worked with the Public Works Department and when they established the stormwater utility here. So, but I haven't been active really since I had to become caretaker, and that's my principal job. With a few other things on the side.
But you wouldn't have it any other way, I would assume.
No.
Yeah. It's just, when you look back at your whole life and the full circle, probably your biggest thing that you have no regrets for was turning down officer training school and getting into the engineering program.
It was the right thing to do.
You probably at that time had no idea how much of an impact that would make on, like we said, not only your life, but obviously the influence you had on the lives of your children as well, and all that from from the beginning of your time at the end of World War II.
Yeah.
It's a big full circle.
As my good wife keeps telling me over and over again, that we have been blessed.
Absolutely, you have. Absolutely, you have been blessed. Wrapping up the interview, advice. I always like to ask the greatest generation of all, what advice you have for, not only your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but for society as a whole. You've seen the Great Depression. You've been through World War II. You've done great things with your life. You've seen a lot of things, Mr. Weaver. What general advice do you have for people?
Before I say that, I'd say the people I have known professionally, I shouldn't even say professionally, over the year. I'm not talking about, obviously my father had a great deal, mother had influence, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, you mentioned the greatest generation, but the people that I have known, my greatest talent was to recognize who they were, pay attention to what they were saying, and letting them be my mentors, and I have known some incredible people over the years. I really have. And they have all had the influence on me. But the basic thing that I would say, and I know that my religious conversion had an impact on me as a Christian, is that everything that your life has done, you are not the centerpiece. What you've been doing, you're doing for others. That made the difference. That made the difference. I did very well as a public health service officer. I was the second youngest four-striper in the history, and that kind of. What was the secret of that was because that the people that were mentors to me, and I'm talking about like the guys I met with way back in the beginning who were working in the North Dakota State Health Department, I'm not talking about working with United States congressmen or anything like that, although I have. I'm talking about working with what I call ordinary people who were my mentors, and trying to emulate them. So I spent my career, when somebody was working with me, my big job was to make it possible for him to get his job done. And that's what I spent my energies on. And it paid off. I mean, we don't have enough time to talk about it, but I can tell you some stories that have really had an impact on what's happened in the history of our country. I'm not exaggerating it either, because I was in a position to make it possible for somebody who had the capability of doing something to do what needed to be done. And you say, well, come on, what are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about basic stuff that allowed us to tackle some of the toughest water pollution control problems that this country faced. I'm talking about scientific and technical people who had the knowledge of searching down things and doing things. And I was able to be in a position to help them do that.
Right. Yeah, it's you should write a book.
Yeah, well, like I say, the biggest medal I ever got in the Army was that guy with all the pips on his shoulder telling me he got the best cup of tea that he ever got. Well, one of the guys who was technical director under my direction, he's got the United States Environmental Protection Center named after him.
It's quite an accomplishment.
Deservedly so. But it wasn't because of what Leo Weaver did, but it was because of when he was the director of technical operations. I made sure that he had the wherewithal and so on to get done what he was capable of doing, and he did. Incredible guy, he really was. But like I say, not very many people, I suppose, have heard of the Andrew Breidenbach Environmental Research Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. But he's the guy who was named after, and rightly so because of his accomplishments.
I think maybe to sum up, your advice would be to be a part of something bigger than yourself,
Yeah.
and the proverbial never look a gift horse in the mouth, and don't take it for granted.
To help others.
Be a part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
It's quite a story, quite an accomplishment.
Yeah. You're going to end up feeling pretty darn good about life.
Mm-hmm.
You
I can see that in you.
yeah.
You don't have any regrets.
Oh, none. Oh, there were some things that I've done that I wouldn't
That you
do.
regretted.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I don't have any regret. I regret it. But
All in all, would you do it over again the same way?
I might have handled.
And we're not talking
might have handled a few things a little differently, with a little more. But I didn't have that kind of capability in those days, I guess.
But all in all, you're quite satisfied with what
yeah.
you've done in 90 years.
Oh yeah. And there's not a bit of smugness in that at all.
I don't see any of it.
No, I don't know where Mary Lou is now, but I haven't even mentioned her, my wife. I joke again. While I was out saving the world, she was raising our 6 kids.
Toughest job of all.
Everything that implies, Yeah, we made a heck of a team.
Still do.
Yeah.
Still do.
It's what's that movie? It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
No, I think a lot of people who will watch this in the future, and including your own family, will realize, how fortunate, as you said you were earlier, very fortunate man, very fortunate couple, very fortunate family, especially for your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids. Extremely blessed to have you and when I say you, you and Mary Lou together, to have them, in their lives, and great role models. You're fantastic role models, for sure.
Well, I hope so.
Well, there's no hope. I think you are. Mr. Weaver, again, thank you for allowing us into your home. Again, part of the greatest generation of all, and it's been my honor to talk to you.
And I would be totally remiss in not coming back at you and saying, Charlie, thank you for everything you're doing and what you have done.
Well, thank you, sir. It's quite an honor coming.
You need to feel pretty good about it, too.
I appreciate that.
There's nothing smug about that.
Again, it's because of the guys like you, though, that gave us the freedom to do this kind of stuff, and your stories are what's really important and should never be forgotten. So, as much as I appreciate
But you know what?
your kind words, it's about you.
That means we were successful.